Are you getting the internet speeds you're paying for? And above all, do you have the data to prove it? Because if you're going to start an argument with your ISP, they'll be asking you questions about what, where, when, and how, and you'd better have solid data to prove your points. And that's exactly what I want to show you today. I want to show you one of the easiest and most reliable ways of constantly monitoring your internet connection, so you have this peace of mind and you can troubleshoot your connection. I'll show you an example of it. This here is Speedtest-Tracker at one of my locations, and here you can see the internet connection was regularly completely dead. You'd have dropped off video conferencing calls, important Linux ISO downloads would fail, and video streaming would buffer. So I complained with the charts and the data, and they changed something. It got better, but it still wasn't good. And that's the second part of the graph here, where you can see that the blue download speeds are all over the place. So I wasn't getting what I was paying for, and obviously I complained again. And lo and behold, with all the data I sent them, they changed something again. And now, and that's the third part of the graph, you can see that download and upload speeds are rather solid at around 180 to 190 Mbits downstream. So that is great. It really helped me out here. And I'll show you a second quick example. This is another location of my client, of one of my clients, and he asked me to troubleshoot it because the internet connection was broken. Now, whatever that means from a technical standpoint, but as you can see, the internet connection is terribly slow with 20 Mbit, but it is rock solid. And turns out it wasn't the internet connection that was the problem, it was the Wi-Fi access points. So if you want to be able to troubleshoot your internet connection, if you want to have this peace of mind that if something happens, you can prove what's been happening, then this Speedtest-Tracker is the exact way of going by it. You can run it on any kind of hardware, and I'll first show you what you can do with the application, and then we'll go into the installation itself. It's free, it's open source, and it's really fun. And I run it by now on over 20 locations. So, first of all, let's click around. We'll take this installation here, and you get your full nice dashboard. You can see the latest results. You can even queue a speed test now straight away, but in most cases you just want to run it on a regular basis. You have graphs, last 24 hours, which are at last quite good. This is a dip between 160 and 200, so it is not as bad as it looks, or you can have a longer time view onto the whole thing. It also monitors ping, jitter, and all kinds of other things, and you can set thresholds. So you can say here, thresholds, I want to enable thresholds, and then you can say a minimum download, upload speed, a maximum ping, and then you can set notifications based on that. So here, for example, you can set up notifications via email and Telegram, but there's also other ways of doing it, depending on how you installed it. You can throw it all into an InfluxDB, a time-based database. That's going to kill the scope of this video, so we're not going to go into that. And then there's the general settings. This is your time zone, name, and of course the schedule in which you want to run it. And this is a cron schedule. There's a very helpful link, so you can figure out what to put in there, but the default is just fine. It's hourly, and you'll be doing great there. In some cases, you might want to set a specific server that you always want to test against. Now there's all kinds of other things that you can set up. It comes with authentication, so you can have different users. I'm not going to click on that because that is then real users in a real system. And of course there's the link to the documentation and everything else. So you can toggle between dark mode and light mode. I've set it to dark mode to keep it easy on the eyes. And that is the quick overview of what you get. Now let's get into running it, and that is super easy. You need some kind of hardware that will be running at best 24/7, because otherwise monitoring the connection won't be much good if the thing is only on for a few hours a day. So you can run it on any laptop, a Mac, Windows, Linux machine. There's routers that can run it. You can run it on Synologies and other NAS systems. I personally prefer running it off single board computers, like for example a Raspberry Pi. Go for at least a Raspberry Pi 3, And in this case, it's a Rock Pi because they're cheaper, faster, and available. So you choose what kind of hardware you want to run it on, and then you'll need Docker and Docker Compose. Now wait, before you go away, because you haven't touched on Docker yet, I won't be explaining Docker in this video, but if you're not using Docker yet, you are missing out on one of the single most fun and door-opening technologies that you can run in your house, on your network, and on your devices. So Google the hardware that you've chosen, plus Docker and Docker Compose installation, and you'll find lots of ways of running it. Try and get a rootless setup, because for security reasons it's much better to not run Docker as root. You want to run it as a normal user. And I will start from the point where you have Docker and Docker Compose running on the system. There's a graphical interface for using it. You could use Portainer, but the easiest and fastest way to get into it is just using a terminal, a shell, PowerShell, whatever. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So this project itself is maintained by Alex Justerson. He's doing a phenomenal job. Actually, this Speedtest-Tracker was developed initially by Henry Whitaker, but Alex has taken over because Henry has abandoned the project. And I think there's quite a bit of recode or rewrite in this. And if you have a GitHub account, please make sure to at least star the repository or even consider donating. The links are in the description, and there's a fantastic documentation that tells you everything you have to do, and it's a few lines of code that you just start and run. And we'll be doing that together. So the documentation page is right here, and here you want to click on installation, and there's different ways of doing it, but you want to use the Docker Compose way, and we'll do the easiest way of just doing it with a local database, SQLite. It's the least hassle, and it's a great entry point. I personally like running it on MariaDBs or PostgreSQLs because that gives you a few more options, but that is not part of this video. So this is all the code you need. We'll be modifying it because it won't quite work out of the box, or you just want to change a few things. So I'll copy it, and then I'll go to my single board computer running here. So let's have a look at the terminal itself. I like to keep Docker in its own folder, so all Docker related stuff will be in a Docker folder, and here you want to nano the Docker compose.yaml file. Now I've got one prepared, so just for the sake of this video I'm going to put in a raw behind that. You don't need to do that, just nano a Docker compose.yaml file. And this is a fresh file, and here I will copy in the code or the script from the documentation. Now there's a few things we have to change here, and see this as a little tutorial on how Docker Compose works, and if you use it yourself, how other people use it. So you start off with the version itself. Don't go below 3.3. Don't have to change that really. We're going to be defining services, and the service that we're defining is Speedtest-Tracker. We're going to give it a container name, and you can change it to something else. On most locations I just call it speed test without the tracker because I don't have any other speed tests running on the same server, and it's a bit easier to type, but that's completely up to you. Now if you're running several things, then you might want to add a host name and call it speedtest.home home or something like that, but you don't need that, we'll leave it out here. Now it's going to run on ports, and this is one important thing for Docker and Docker Compose. Anything on the left side of the colon you can change freely. Anything on the right hand side are internal ports, and you must not change them, otherwise it will break. Yes? So here 8080 is the port it wants to run for unencrypted traffic, and Speedtest-Tracker comes with a self-signed certificate. If you want to run it on the open internet or somewhere else and you want SSL encryption, then it will also have a way of accessing the admin interface that is encrypted. Now, I don't like using these ports because they might just collide with other systems and containers on the same machine. That might not be as flexible in changing their ports. So you can just be lazy and put a 1 in front of it. As long as you stay under around 50,000, it will be just fine. So we'll be accessing this at the IP address of our machine here and at the port 18080. Now, that's the ports. You want to run it in a non-root environment. That's part of the channel here. When we do things, we do them secure, at least as secure as possible without going to huge lengths. And that means we want to run it as the user and group ID that we are logged in with on this server here. Now, for me it's 1000, for many people it's 1000, but it can be a different number. And I'll show you right after editing this Docker Compose file what number, how you can find out what numbers you have to put in. We'll just leave the 1000 here for a moment. Now, volumes is super important because usually if you run Docker and you update the image and the container and you delete it, change it, move it, whatever, your data is not persistent. It only lives within the container. So we have to mount a folder into this Docker image so it can save its data there. Now, what I like to do here is I like to use the shortcut for the home directory, and that means it will be in my home directory and there in the Docker folder that we are in now, and then we'll put up speed test right here. And the next folder is for the self-signed SSL certificates, and here again we won't put it into the same folder. The reason is that your speed test results are maybe less important than the SSL key, and there's a few other reasons for that too. So we'll just say speed test minus SSL. So now we've told Docker Compose to use these folders to save the data from the container. And now you can see it's using the latest image from Speedtest-Tracker. That means it will automatically pull the image, create the container, and run the whole system. And it's using the tag latest, so the newest version will always be used. Since I've been using Alex's Speedtest-Tracker for ages now, I can tell you the latest is always stable. He is doing a phenomenal job. So you can put in latest here. I wouldn't do that with other things that I'm running, but in this case, latest is just fine. And last but not least, if anything happens, the server reboots, you do updates and reboot it, whatever, you want the container to restart at all points in time. So this is the Docker Compose file. You would save it, Control X, Y, and Enter, and now we have our Docker Compose running. Now I told you that number for your user ID and your group ID, the easiest way to find that is cat/etc/pass_wd, and because that's a protected file, you'll have to add a sudo in front. So I'll press enter, and here you can see all the users on my system, and the user I'm running it under is dietpy, which has the user and group ID 1000. Now I like using dietpy simply because it is dead easy to install it on an absolute multitude of single board computers. You can get really old or obscure ones, dodge the whole Raspberry Pi pricing, and just run the stuff on there. So that's a very nice and easy way of doing it. So 1000 is the number for me. You'll have to find out what number your user has and which group ID number he has, and then you put that into your Docker Compose file. And now, I'll just clear the screen. Now we just start it, and it's as easy as Docker Compose up for start it all up, -D for run it as a daemon. That means it will run in the background. Now, you could just press enter and it will all start working, but I like adding Docker logs speed test -tracker. That was the container name that we gave it, -tf. Now I'll press enter and then I'll explain to you while it's pulling all the devices what I've done. With the 2 ampersands, I'm adding a second command, and here I've added the command docker logs because I want to view the logs of the container Speedtest-Tracker, and I want to follow the logs. So the nice thing about this is that as soon as the pull, the download, the extraction, creation, all of that magic is completed, then we get to see the logs of the container while it's booting up. And that is hugely helpful for any kind of troubleshooting and just understanding what's happening. And if you get anything wrong in your Docker Compose file, then usually Docker Compose is quite verbose and will give you rather precise error messages. And in nearly all cases, it's because you copied it wrong, you indented it wrong, because it's YAML, so it really makes a difference how many spaces you put in front, and everything has to be lined up nicely. And in this case, then it will tell you what line is wrong, and you'll have to just go back and run it again. Correct it and then run it again. So and now you can see that the container is being created, and it will take a few seconds to start up, and then you'll see the booting mechanism sort of from within the container, because we've added this extra command ampersand docker logs container name -tf. And just one or two hints here on the hardware. You can use virtual machines and run it in there. Proxmox is just fine. I run it very often on simple old Raspberry Pis. So Raspberry Pi 3, I can mail it to a client and things like that, and it will work just fine. They just hook it up via LAN and it will do a reverse tunnel to me. But that's maybe a topic for a different video. As you can see, Speedtest-Tracker has started, and it's done all kinds of magic. Database has been created. Usually, I've started it once beforehand. I know it's cheating, but just to be sure. So usually it would say created and things like that. Now, you get started at the IP address of your machine that you're running on. In my case, it's a local machine. And do remember to put in the colon and then that port number that you put in on the left-hand side of the colon in the Docker Compose file. And you press enter. This is the login interface. And just so you know, in this case, you would have to you click on authentication in the documentation, and it has a default username and password. So you pop in the username and the password, and that was just password, and then you sign in and you're good to go. So that is Speedtest-Tracker, free open source software. It is great, and it helps me a lot to be a digital independent, because then at least I know I can rely on my internet connections. There's a few power user tricks here, just for those of you who have been had so much patience to the end of this video. I like taking it with me on a small single board computer, for example. So when I'm traveling, for example, I'll hook it into my hotel room, and that way I know how good the internet connection is. And that will go into the review of the hotel. And I just know if I have a video conferencing call in the next few days, then I know if I can rely on the hotel internet connection, or if I'll have to go hunting for another connection or run it via mobile. It's very nice to run on VPSs, on virtual private servers. So usually if I'm trying out a new VPS, I'll just quickly install Docker Compose, put on the basic security settings that I do for VPSs, and then the first thing I'll install is the Speedtest-Tracker, and I'll just let it run for a day or two, because I'm not going to start setting up a server or VPS if it's not reliable. So it's also a very nice way of doing quality assurance for all networking assets that you have running anywhere. And it's also good if you're building your own VPNs, for example, with WireGuard, then it's very nice to just know, okay, that is a system that I can rely on. So please give the video a like so other people have the chance to see it, and to show YouTube that this video is worthwhile. And consider subscribing to the channel if you also want to join me on my path to being a digital independent. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.